Blood mixed with the red dust of Harvest 7 as Danny Reed pressed himself against the scorched metal of their destroyed transport vehicle. The smell of burning electronics and something worse filled his nostrils. 3 days ago, his unit had been 42 soldiers strong. Now he could count the survivors on one hand. Lieutenant Harris coughed up blood beside him, the older man's chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Danny had already used most of their medical supplies trying to patch the holes in his commanding officer. It wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough out here on the frontier. "Reed," Harris wheezed, grabbing Danny's sleeve with a trembling hand. "You need to fall back, get the others out of here." Danny shook his head, checking the charge on his rifle. 15%, maybe enough for one more firefight if he was careful. "Can't do that, sir. The refugee camp is right behind us. 15,000 civilians down there with nowhere to go." "That's not our mission anymore," Harris insisted, wincing as pain shot through him. "Our mission was to patrol the perimeter. We did that. We got ambushed. Now we extract and regroup." Through the haze of smoke, Danny could see the valley below. Makeshift shelters stretched as far as the eye could see. Families huddled together. He'd counted at least 20 different species down there, all fleeing from various conflicts across this sector. Some had skin like blue leather, others had scales or fur or things he didn't have names for. It didn't matter. They were all just trying to survive. "With respect, sir," Danny said quietly, "I didn't join up to abandon people who need help." An explosion echoed from the eastern ridge. Corporal Amy Wilson came scrambling over the rocks, her left leg dragging at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked through her uniform pants, but she still had her rifle clutched tight in both hands. "Talric scouts spotted our position," she reported through gritted teeth. "Maybe 200 hostiles moving up the canyon. They'll be here by dawn." Danny felt his stomach drop. 200 against 4 wounded humans. The math was simple and brutal. Private Ben Torres crawled out from under the transport wreckage, his right arm ending in a hastily cauterized stump just below the elbow. The kid was barely 20 years old, pale and shaking from blood loss, but he'd managed to get their communications array working again. "I sent out a distress call," Ben said, his voice cracking. "Human reinforcements are 6 days out. Command says to hold position if possible, but to prioritize personnel extraction if overrun." "There's that word again," Danny muttered. "Extract, retreat, fall back." He looked at each of them in turn. "We all know what happens if we leave. The Talric don't take prisoners. They don't care about refugee conventions or civilian protections. Those 15,000 people down there become casualties the moment we're gone." Amy propped herself against a rock, checking her scope despite the pain radiating from her shattered leg. "I'm not going anywhere with this leg anyway. Might as well make it count." "I lost my good arm," Ben added with a weak smile. "But I can still work communications and spot targets, assuming you're planning something crazy, Danny." Lieutenant Harris closed his eyes, and for a moment Danny thought he'd lost him. Then the lieutenant spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Field promotion, Reed. You're in command now. Do what you think is right." Danny felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He was a medic from rural Montana who joined the service to pay for medical school. He wasn't supposed to be making life and death decisions for thousands of people. But here he was, on an alien world with 3 wounded soldiers and an impossible choice. He pulled out his canteen and took a long drink, then passed it around. They each drank, a small ritual of solidarity. "All right," Danny said, his mind already working through possibilities. "We've got one night to turn this ridge into hell for anyone trying to cross it. Amy, you're our eyes. Find firing positions with overlapping fields of view. Ben, I need you to hack into every Talric communication frequency you can find. If they're going to hit us, I want to hear them coming." "What about me?" Harris asked. "You're going to rest, sir. Save your strength. I'll need your tactical knowledge before this is over." Danny stood and looked out over the valley one more time. Cooking fires were being lit in the refugee camp as darkness fell. He could hear the faint sound of someone singing, the melody strange but beautiful. Children were probably settling down to sleep, unaware of the army marching toward them. High above, he noticed lights in orbit. Ships hung in the black, watching. The Galactic Council observers, no doubt, recording everything, intervening in nothing. Their policy of strict neutrality was famous across the galaxy. They would watch the massacre and do absolutely nothing to stop it. Danny pulled out a small recording device and activated it. If they were going to die here, someone should know why. This is Private First Class Danny Reed of the Human Expeditionary Forces, currently stationed on Harvest 7. If anyone finds this, you should know that we had a choice. We could have run. Command gave us permission to extract, but there are 15,000 civilians in the valley below us, and the Tauric Confederacy is coming to slaughter them. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm a medic. I took an oath to preserve life. My friends here, they're soldiers. They took an oath to protect the innocent. Those oaths don't have fine print about species or political affiliations. So we're staying. 4 humans against 200 Tauric warriors. The math says we lose, but maybe we can buy enough time for those families down there to mean something. Danny switched off the recorder and got to work. They had 12 hours until dawn, and he intended to use every single second. Tillith's feathers ruffled involuntarily as she watched the human medic organize his impossible defense. Her species, the Centrans, had evolved from avian hunters on a world with gentle gravity and abundant resources. In her 4,000 years of life, she had observed hundreds of conflicts across the galaxy. None of them had looked quite like this. Observer Tillith, her assistant, chirped from the scanning station. The human broadcast is repeating on all emergency frequencies. She had already heard it 3 times. Each replay made her more uncomfortable. The human's voice carried no bravado, no false heroism, just a simple statement of duty that seemed almost naive in its directness. Admiral Preth materialized beside her, his crystalline form refracting the light from the viewscreens into rainbow patterns across the observation deck. The Prothean species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 10,000 years, and they took the non-interference doctrine very seriously. You seem troubled, Preth observed, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. The humans are going to die, Tillith replied, keeping her tone professional. 4 wounded soldiers against a Tauric battalion. The outcome is certain. Then why does it disturb you? We have witnessed countless battles. Death is a universal constant. Tillith pulled up the human medical records on her display. Private Danny Reed, 24 standard years old. He scored in the 98th percentile on tactical assessments. His medical skills are exceptional. He could have had a position far from combat zones, but he volunteered for frontier duty. And he's choosing to die for people he's never met, people who aren't even his species. The refugees down there include Velorians, Sanctor, Kresh, even some Tauric civilians who fled their own government. Reed has no political ties to any of them, no tribal obligations, no genetic imperative to protect them. Preth's form shifted colors, indicating mild interest. The humans are a young species. Perhaps they simply don't understand the futility of his gesture. Tillith had spent the last 3 days studying every piece of human history she could access. What she found disturbed her more than the coming battle. Humans had a pattern, a consistent thread through their violent and chaotic development. They formed bonds across genetic lines, adopted unrelated offspring, died for abstract concepts like honor and duty. It's not ignorance, she said slowly. It's philosophy. Humans have a concept they call universal human rights, but they extend it beyond their own species. They believe that sentient life has inherent value regardless of origin. A dangerous ideology, Preth stated. Such thinking leads to crusades and forced cultural integration. Or it leads to this. Tillith gestured at the viewscreen showing Danny Reed moving between defensive positions, checking on his wounded comrades, preparing weapons he knew wouldn't be enough. On another screen, she watched the Tauric forces preparing their assault. Commander Warwick had arrived personally to oversee the attack. The Tauric Confederacy viewed mercy as weakness and compromise as surrender. They had built an empire on the principle that strength determined worth, and the weak deserved elimination. In many ways, the Tauric philosophy made more evolutionary sense than the human approach. Resources were finite. Competition was natural. The strong survived and the weak perished. That was the pattern across most of galactic civilization. But then what explained the human anomaly? Observer Tillith, incoming transmission from the Tauric command vessel. Commander Warwick is attempting to contact the human forces. Route it to my station. Warwick's face appeared on her screen. The Tauric commander had the typical features of his species: scaled skin the color of polished stone, 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern, and jaw structure designed for crushing prey. He was considered a brilliant tactician and absolutely ruthless in combat. Human defenders, Warwick's voice boomed across all channels, I offer you one chance for honorable surrender. Lay down your weapons and submit to Tauric custody. You will be treated according to military convention. Tillith watched Danny's response with intense focus. The young human was quiet for a long moment, then activated his transmitter. Commander Warwick, this is Private Danny Reed. I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to decline. We have civilians to protect. The refugees are not your concern, Warwick replied. They are targets in a legitimate military operation. Your interference is a violation of Tauric sovereignty. Sovereignty doesn't give you the right to murder families, Danny said calmly. We're not moving. If you want this ridge, you'll have to take it. Tillith found herself holding her breath. This was the moment when most species would negotiate, would look for compromise or tactical withdrawal. The logical move was to bargain for the refugees' lives in exchange for surrender. But Danny Reed wasn't negotiating. He was drawing a line and daring the Tauric to cross it. Warwick's expression shifted to something that might have been respect or might have been anger. You have courage, human. It will not save you. At dawn, my forces will take that position, and the refugees will be eliminated as scheduled. You die for nothing. Maybe, Danny replied, but at least I'll die doing my job. The transmission ended. Tillith brought up the tactical display, watching as both sides prepared for the coming battle. The Tauric had superior numbers, better weapons, and the advantage of fresh troops. The humans had a strong defensive position, intimate knowledge of the terrain from 3 days of fighting, and absolutely nothing to lose. Her assistant appeared beside her again. Observer Tillith, the Council is requesting your preliminary assessment of human military capability. She knew what they were really asking. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 40 years ago. They were still being evaluated, still being tested to determine if they were ready for full integration or if they represented a threat to galactic stability. This battle would inform that decision. Tell the Council that human tactical skills are adequate but not exceptional. Their weapons technology is several generations behind current galactic standards. Their physiology is unremarkable, neither particularly strong nor particularly durable. And their psychological profile. Tillith looked at the screen showing Danny Reed checking on Lieutenant Harris, adjusting the dying man's position to make him more comfortable even as death approached. She watched Corporal Amy Wilson settling into her sniper position despite the agony of her broken leg. She saw young Ben Torres, one-armed and terrified, still working his communication station with absolute focus. Their psychological profile is unprecedented, she said quietly. They possess an irrational commitment to abstract moral principles that supersede self-preservation. Recommend continued observation. What she didn't add to her official report was the question keeping her awake. What kind of galaxy would it be if more species thought like humans? And what kind of civilization were they building if they could watch Danny Reed die without lifting a finger to help? Dawn was 6 hours away. The first sun crested the horizon, painting the red dust of Harvest 7 in shades of orange and gold. Danny Reed watched the light spread across the valley, knowing it might be the last sunrise he'd ever see. Beauty and death arriving together, indifferent to his presence. "Contact," Amy Wilson whispered through the communication link. 200 meters east, advancing in standard Tauric formation. Danny peered through the scope he'd salvaged from a destroyed vehicle. The Tauric warriors moved like a living wave across the rocky terrain, their scaled bodies gleaming in the early light. Each one carried weapons that could cut through their makeshift defenses like paper. "Ben, you ready with that surprise?" Danny asked. "Charges are set," Ben confirmed, his voice steadier than it had been yesterday. "Just say the word." Danny had spent the night turning the ridge into a maze of traps and kill zones. Every piece of debris from their destroyed vehicles had been repurposed. Fuel cells became improvised explosives. Reflective panels became mirrors to confuse thermal imaging. Medical supplies created smoke screens. He'd used every trick he'd learned in combat engineer training, plus a few he'd invented on the spot. The Tauric forces split into 3 groups, exactly as Danny had predicted. They were following standard assault doctrine, overwhelming force applied from multiple angles. It was effective against conventional defenses, but nothing about their position was conventional. "Wait for it," Danny murmured, tracking the lead group through his scope. "Let them commit." The Tauric warriors reached the first checkpoint, a narrow passage between 2 massive boulders. Their point scouts checked for obvious traps, found nothing, and signaled the advance. "Now, Ben." The explosion wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. The shaped charges Danny had placed collapsed the rock face above the passage, sending tons of stone cascading down. 12 Tauric warriors disappeared under the rubble. The survivors scrambled backward, right into the secondary trap, fuel cell charges that turned the retreat path into an inferno. Amy's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. Each shot found a target. She'd positioned herself on the highest point of the ridge, giving her clear sight lines across the entire battlefield. Despite her shattered leg, despite the pain that had to be excruciating, her hands remained steady. "Western approach is moving faster than expected," she reported. "Danny, you've got incoming on your position." Danny grabbed his rifle and moved to the western defensive point. 6 Tauric warriors were climbing the rocky slope, using their superior strength to scale terrain that would have stopped most species. They were 30 meters away and closing fast. He couldn't match them in raw power, but he understood human advantages. Humans weren't the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but they were adaptable. They learned. They improvised. Danny triggered the first trap, a tripwire connected to a cluster of smoke grenades. Thick gray smoke billowed across the slope, cutting visibility to almost nothing. The Tauric had thermal imaging in their helmets, so Danny had prepared for that too. He'd scattered heat packs across the rocks, creating dozens of false signatures. Through the smoke, Danny heard confused Tauric voices. They were trying to coordinate, to identify real threats from decoys. He used those precious seconds to relocate, moving to a position 15 meters south of where he'd been. When the first Tauric warrior emerged from the smoke, Danny put 3 rounds into the weak points in his armor: neck joint, hip joint, knee. The warrior fell, screaming in pain but still alive. Danny wasn't trying to kill them all. He was trying to slow them down, make them cautious, make them afraid. "Southern approach is breaking through," Ben called out. "They're going to flank us." Danny's mind raced through options. They couldn't defend all three approaches simultaneously. The Taurik would eventually overwhelm them through sheer numbers, but they didn't need to win. They just needed to hold long enough. Ben, transmit on all Taurik frequencies. Tell them we've rigged the entire ridge with explosives. If they don't withdraw, we'll bring the whole thing down on ourselves and them. It was a bluff. They didn't have nearly enough explosives for that, but the Taurik didn't know that. Transmitting now, Ben replied. For a moment the Taurik advance faltered. Danny could almost feel their uncertainty. Was the human crazy enough to kill himself just to take them with him? After what they'd already witnessed, they couldn't be sure. Commander Warwick's voice boomed across the battlefield. The human is bluffing. All units advance and overwhelm. So much for psychological warfare. The battle became a desperate blur. Amy's rifle kept up a steady rhythm, each shot carefully placed to create maximum chaos. Ben called out target positions and enemy movements, his young voice never wavering despite the terror Danny knew he must be feeling. Lieutenant Harris, too weak to fight, still provided tactical advice from his position, his mind sharp even as his body failed. Danny moved between defensive positions like a ghost, appearing wherever the line threatened to break. He used his medical knowledge in reverse, targeting joints and nerve clusters on Taurik anatomy. Every opponent he wounded became a burden on their comrades, slowing the advance further. But they were losing ground. Inevitably, methodically, the Taurik pushed forward. Danny's ammunition was running low. Amy had taken a grazing hit to her shoulder but kept firing. Ben's communication equipment sparked and smoked from damage. Then something changed in the Taurik approach. They started moving more cautiously, showing respect for the defenses. Some of the warriors looked at Danny with something other than contempt. He'd wounded 23 of them, killed 7, and held this position for 8 hours with 3 other wounded humans. Warwick himself appeared on the eastern approach, moving with the confidence of a warrior who'd never lost. He locked eyes with Danny across 50 meters of battlefield, and in that moment, a strange understanding passed between them. "You fight well, human," Warwick called out. "You have earned an honorable death." Danny ejected his spent magazine and loaded his last one. "Not dead yet, Commander." "Soon," Warwick promised and charged. The final assault began. Danny knew they had minutes left, maybe less. But when he glanced down at the valley, he saw refugee families still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the battle raging above them. Every second mattered. Every moment he held was another heartbeat of life for 15,000 souls who deserved to see another sunrise. Danny Reed raised his rifle and kept fighting. Tillith watched the human medic collapse from blood loss after his hand-to-hand fight with Commander Warwick. Danny Reed had managed to wound the Taurik commander before going down, but the cost had been severe. 3 deep gashes across his chest, a shattered collarbone, and injuries she couldn't fully assess from orbit. Corporal Wilson dragged herself across the rocks toward her fallen leader, her broken leg leaving a trail of blood. Private Torres crawled out from his communication post, one arm pressed against his side. Lieutenant Harris tried to stand but couldn't manage it. They were finished. The Taurik warriors regrouped for a final push. In minutes, the ridge would fall, and the massacre in the valley below would begin. Tillith's claws hovered over the communication console. 800 years of council protocol demanded she observe and record. Nothing more. The non-interference doctrine existed for good reasons: to prevent council species from fighting proxy wars, to maintain neutrality in local conflicts, to avoid the moral hazard of choosing sides. But watching Danny Reed lying in the red dust, having given everything for people who would never know his name, Tillith found those reasons hollow. "Observer Tillith," Admiral Preth's voice crackled over the link, "you are showing elevated stress indicators. Perhaps you should rotate to rest shift." "Admiral, I need to speak with you privately." This is not an appropriate time for philosophical discussions. Admiral, that human down there just held a position for 8 hours against 200 Tauric warriors. He's a medic, not a combat specialist. His training focused on saving lives, yet he's displayed tactical brilliance that our own analysts find remarkable. Preth's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been annoyance. Your point. My point is that we're witnessing something unprecedented. The human concept of duty extends beyond species, beyond tribe, beyond any rational self-interest. If we let this moment pass without documentation, without proper analysis, we're failing in our primary mission as observers. We have documented everything, Preth replied coldly. The data is complete. The human fought well and will die well. This changes nothing. Tilith made her decision. Her claws moved across the console with practiced precision, entering override codes she'd never used in 4,000 years of service. Observer Tilith, what are you doing? My duty, Admiral. Not the duty you assigned, but the duty that matters. She triggered the emergency broadcast protocol, transmitting across all council channels, all civilian networks, all military frequencies within 3 star systems. The footage began streaming. Danny Reed's entire stand, from the moment he refused to retreat to his final charge against Warwick. But she didn't just send raw footage. She added context, medical assessments showing the extent of his injuries, tactical analysis demonstrating the impossibility of what he'd accomplished, audio of his recorded message explaining why he chose to stay. Most importantly, she included footage of something she'd noticed hours ago. Danny performing emergency triage on wounded Tauric soldiers who'd fallen near his position. Even in the middle of combat, even facing an enemy trying to kill him, the human medic had taken precious seconds to stabilize injured opponents so they wouldn't bleed out. Observer Tilith, you are in violation of direct council protocols. Cease this transmission immediately. No, Admiral. You will be stripped of rank and face tribunal. I know. The broadcast reached 47 different species within the first minute. Tilith watched the response metrics climb. View counts in the millions, then tens of millions. The footage of Danny's stand went viral across galactic networks faster than anything she'd ever witnessed. She switched her display to show reaction feeds from different species. The response was electric. The Velorians, a peaceful species that had lost colonies to Tauric aggression, were holding emergency government sessions. The footage of a human protecting Velorian refugees had triggered massive public outcry demanding intervention. The Sanctor, an old and cautious species that rarely involved themselves in frontier conflicts, were debating the philosophical implications. Their religious leaders were calling Danny's sacrifice a holy act worthy of their ancient martyrs. Even species that had no connection to the conflict were moved. The Kresh, a warrior culture that valued strength above all else, were sharing the footage with commentary about true courage. The fact that Danny had shown mercy to wounded enemies while still fighting ferociously had earned their deepest respect. Observer Tilith, you have triggered a diplomatic crisis, Preth said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Multiple species are demanding council intervention. Our neutrality is compromised. Good, Tilith replied simply. New ships began appearing in orbit around Harvest 7. Not military vessels at first, but civilian transports. Medical ships from the Healers Concordat, the oldest humanitarian organization in the galaxy. Supply vessels from species offering aid to the refugees. News ships from a dozen networks, all wanting to cover the story firsthand. Then the military ships arrived. A Velorian defense cruiser, 3 Sanctor patrol vessels, a Kresh warrior clan ship. None of them were massive or particularly powerful individually, but together they represented something that hadn't happened in galactic history. a spontaneous coalition forming around a moral principle rather than political alliance. The leader of the Healers' Concordat transmitted directly to Tillith. Observer, we're detecting human life signs on that ridge. Critical condition. Requesting permission to land medical teams. Permission granted, Tillith said, even though she had no authority to grant such permission. Observer Tillith, Preth's voice had gone cold. You are hereby relieved of duty and placed under arrest. Security will escort you to confinement. Understood, Admiral. But before I go, you should know that the broadcast has reached over 300 million viewers across 47 species. The coalition forming in orbit represents 23 different governments. You can arrest me, but you can't stop what's already in motion. She watched as medical shuttles launched from the Healers' Concordat vessel, racing toward the ridge where Danny lay dying. Tauric forces had pulled back, confused by the sudden appearance of so many ships in orbit. The council chamber was erupting in chaos. Species representatives were demanding explanations, demanding action, demanding to know why the council had stood by during such a clear humanitarian crisis. Admiral Preth appeared in her command center personally, flanked by security officers. Observer Tillith, you have violated every protocol we hold sacred. You have destroyed your career and endangered council neutrality. What do you have to say for yourself? Tillith stood, extending her wrists for restraints. I say that I watched a human medic sacrifice everything for 15,000 strangers, and I couldn't let that sacrifice be meaningless. If our protocols demand we watch such things without response, then our protocols are wrong. As security led her away, she saw on the screens that the medical teams had reached Danny. They were working to stabilize him, to save the life of a soldier who had changed everything. Danny woke to voices speaking in languages his translator couldn't quite parse. Pain radiated through his entire body, sharp and insistent. But he was alive, which meant he'd failed his mission. Dead men didn't feel pain. Easy, soldier, a gentle voice said in accented English. A face appeared above him, features that suggested the healer species. 6 eyes arranged in a circle, skin that shifted colors based on emotion. You've been in surgery for 7 hours. Don't try to move. The refugees, Danny croaked, his throat raw. The valley. Safe, the Tauric withdrew when the coalition ships arrived. You held them long enough. Danny closed his eyes, letting relief wash over him. 15,000 people were alive. That was all that mattered. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as agony shot through his chest. Your friends are recovering too, the healer continued. Corporal Wilson will walk again, though she'll need physical therapy. Private Torres is being fitted with a prosthetic arm. Lieutenant Harris survived the night, though it was close. How long was I out? 3 days. You've become quite famous during that time. Famous? The word felt wrong. Danny was just a medic who'd done his job. He started to say so, but another voice interrupted. Private Reed, we need to talk. A Centran entered the medical bay, her feathers ruffled in what his translator software suggested was distress. My name is Tillith. I was the council observer who broadcast your stand across the galaxy. Danny studied her. I guess I should thank you. Don't, Tillith said quickly. I've triggered something much larger than either of us intended. 23 species have formed a coalition in orbit. The Tauric Confederacy has issued an ultimatum. The coalition has 24 hours to leave Harvest 7, or the Tauric will consider it an act of war. The pain in Danny's chest suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the weight of those words. You're saying my squad holding a ridge might start a galactic war? Yes. Danny's mind raced through the implications. He'd wanted to save the refugees, not ignite a conflict that could kill billions. Can I speak to the coalition leaders? They're requesting the same thing. But Danny, you need to understand what you've become to them. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a symbol. The footage of you protecting refugees while showing mercy to wounded enemies has resonated across dozens of cultures. Some species are calling you a saint. Others see you as the embodiment of warrior honor. The pressure on you will be immense. I'm just a medic from Montana, Danny said quietly. Not anymore. The coalition leadership meeting happened in Danny's medical bay because he couldn't walk yet. Holographic projections filled the room. A Valorian admiral with silver skin, a Sanctor elder whose form seemed to shift between solid and energy, a Kresh war leader covered in ceremonial scars, and representatives from 20 other species. They looked at Danny with expressions ranging from reverence to curiosity to barely concealed fanaticism. It made his skin crawl. Private Reed, the Valorian admiral began, we have assembled the largest peaceful coalition in galactic history. We are prepared to defend Harvest 7 and establish it as a protected refugee world. But we need your guidance on how to proceed. My guidance, Danny struggled to sit up properly. I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a strategist. I held a ridge because people needed help, that's all. That humility is precisely why we're here, the Sanctor elder said, their voice like wind through crystals. You fought without hatred. You protected without demanding allegiance. You showed mercy even in combat. These are principles we can build a new approach to galactic relations upon. Danny felt the weight of their expectations and knew he had to be honest. Listen, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but if my actions start a war, then I've failed. The whole point was to protect life, not destroy it. The Taurik will not negotiate, the Kresh war leader growled. They see compromise as weakness. If we back down now, they'll view it as cowardice and attack anyway. Then let me talk to their commander, Danny said. Warwick and I fought each other. There was respect in that fight. Maybe there's a foundation we can build on. The coalition leaders exchanged glances. That's highly irregular, the Valorian admiral said. You're in no condition to negotiate. With respect, Admiral, I'm in exactly the right condition. Warwick wounded me. I wounded him. We both paid the price of combat. That gives us common ground. Tillith, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, spoke up. The human is right. Taurik culture values personal honor above institutional authority. A negotiation between warriors might succeed where diplomatic channels fail. The meeting concluded with reluctant agreement. Danny would meet with Commander Warwick under neutral conditions, with both sides maintaining armed presence but agreeing to temporary ceasefire during talks. Amy visited him before the negotiation. She hobbled in on crutches, her leg wrapped in advanced healing nanite bandages. You sure about this, Danny? Warwick nearly killed you. I'm sure. We can't let this turn into a war. Too many people will die. You always were too good for this job, Amy said with a sad smile. Most soldiers would want revenge. You want peace. Revenge doesn't bring anybody back, doesn't protect anybody. It just makes more bodies. Ben came next, his new prosthetic arm gleaming with adaptive technology far beyond human engineering. The Kresh gave me this, he said, flexing the mechanical fingers. Said I earned it defending the innocent. Danny, half the galaxy is watching this negotiation. No pressure or anything. Great, Danny muttered, just what I need. The negotiation site was a neutral zone on the ridge where they'd fought. Danny limped to the meeting point, his body still healing but his mind clear. Warwick approached from the opposite direction, moving with a slight limp from the wound Danny had given him. They stood 5 meters apart, two warriors who tried to kill each other, now facing a decision that would affect billions. You fought well, human, Warwick said. So did you, Commander. Why did you request this meeting? To gloat about the coalition supporting you. Danny shook his head. I requested it to stop a war. Neither of us wants to see millions die because we had a fight. Warwick's 3 eyes narrowed. You assume I care about casualties. I assume you care about honor, Danny replied. There's no honor in a war that kills innocents. You and I, we followed our duties. Can we find a way to honor those duties without more bloodshed? The negotiation lasted 6 hours. Danny and Warwick sat across from each other on the blood-stained rocks where they'd fought, talking like soldiers rather than diplomats. No translators except the basic communication software. No advisors whispering in their ears. Just two warriors trying to find a path forward. Warwick spoke of Tauric culture, where strength determined worth and mercy was viewed as dangerous weakness. Danny listened and shared human history, wars that could have been avoided, cycles of revenge that consumed generations, and the hard lessons learned about the cost of viewing enemies as less than sentient. My government will see your proposal as surrender, Warwick finally said, after Danny outlined a joint administration plan for Harvest 7. Will you see it that way? Danny asked. Warwick was quiet for a long moment, his scaled fingers tracing the wound on his side. I have fought in 43 campaigns. I have never met an enemy who treated our wounded with dignity while still fighting us. You could have let my warriors bleed out. Instead, you stabilized them. They were wounded. That makes them my responsibility as a medic. That makes you either the most honorable warrior I've encountered or the most foolish. Can it be both? Danny asked with a tired smile. Something shifted in Warwick's expression. I will take your proposal to the Tauric High Command. I cannot promise they will accept, but I will argue for it, and my voice carries weight among the warrior caste. That's all I can ask. 3 months passed. Danny spent most of that time recovering and reluctantly serving as humanity's unintended representative to the galactic community. The coalition remained in orbit around Harvest 7 while the Tauric government debated. The debate became public, broadcast across Tauric space. Citizens who'd only known their government's propaganda saw footage of the stand at the ridge. They saw Warwick's respectful testimony about human combat ethics. They heard recordings of Danny treating wounded Tauric soldiers while under fire. A movement began among the Tauric people, young warriors who questioned whether strength alone defined honor. The old guard resisted, but the cultural shift had started. The Galactic Council summoned Danny to address them formally. He stood before representatives of 200 species, still wearing his uniform, still uncomfortable with the attention. Private Reed, the Council Chancellor began, your actions on Harvest 7 have created unprecedented disruption to galactic order. What do you have to say? Danny took a breath, choosing his words carefully. With respect, Chancellor, I didn't set out to disrupt anything. I just did my job. But if my job protecting civilians regardless of species is disruptive to your order, then maybe your order needs disrupting. The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Some species applauded, others demanded his censure. Danny continued, speaking over the noise. I'm not special. Any human soldier would have made the same choice. We're taught that every sentient life has value, that protecting the innocent is our highest duty. I thought that was universal. Finding out it isn't has been the biggest shock of my life. He gestured to the assembled species. You have technology we can't match. Civilizations older than our recorded history. Wisdom from thousands of years of development. But you built a system where observers watch refugees get slaughtered because intervention is inconvenient. Where is the wisdom in that? The Sanctor Elder stood. The human speaks truth we have avoided. Our non-interference doctrine was designed to prevent greater conflicts, but we used it to absolve ourselves of moral responsibility. Other species began standing, adding their voices. The debate raged for hours. Finally, the Council voted to establish new protocols for civilian protection in conflict zones. They called them the Harvest 7 Accords. Tillith was pardoned and promoted, assigned to lead a new council division focused on humanitarian intervention. She found Danny after the council session. You changed the galaxy, she said simply. "I just held a ridge," Danny replied. "No, you showed us what we'd forgotten. That civilization isn't measured by technology or territory. It's measured by how we treat the vulnerable." Danny returned to Earth to finish his medical degree, but the galaxy wouldn't leave him alone. He received messages from across known space. Young beings inspired by his example, soldiers adopting new doctrines of civilian protection, species requesting human advisors to help reform their military ethics. Harvest 7 thrived. The Joint Tauric Coalition administration worked better than anyone expected. Warwick himself took a position overseeing security, arguing that protecting the settlement was the highest form of strength. Refugee families built permanent homes. Children who'd grown up in fear learned to play without watching the sky for danger. 5 years after the stand, Danny visited the ridge one final time before starting his career as a civilian doctor. A memorial had been built, a simple stone marker with names of the 4 soldiers who'd held the position. Flowers from a dozen worlds grew around it, planted by grateful refugees. An elderly Valorian woman approached, leaning on a cane. "Dr. Reed." "Just Danny, ma'am. My grandchildren were in the valley that day. They're adults now, studying at university, planning families of their own. They exist because you refuse to leave." Danny felt his throat tighten. "I was just doing my duty." "Yes," she agreed, "and that changed everything." Later, sitting on the ridge as twin suns set over the thriving settlement, Danny thought about duty and sacrifice and the strange path that had led him here. He joined the military to pay for medical school. He'd expected to serve his time, help some people, and return to a quiet life. Instead, he'd become a symbol for something larger than himself. The Galactic Council had established a civilian protection force modeled on human military ethics. 40 species had reformed their combat doctrines. The concept of universal rights regardless of species origin was spreading across civilizations that had never considered such ideas. All because 4 wounded humans refused to abandon 15,000 strangers. Amy's voice crackled over his communicator. "Danny, you coming to the dedication ceremony? They're naming the new hospital after Harris." "On my way," Danny replied. He stood, taking one last look at the valley below. Lights were coming on in thousands of homes. Valorian, Sanctor, Kresh, Human, Tauric, and dozens of other species living together. Children played in the streets. Families gathered for evening meals. Life continuing because someone had chosen duty over survival. Danny Reed walked down from the ridge, just a medic from Montana who'd done his job. Behind him, the memorial stone caught the fading light, a reminder that small acts of courage can echo across galaxies. The inscription was simple: 4 humans stood here. 15,000 lived because duty mattered more than fear. And beneath that, a new addition carved by the galactic community. Here began the age when all sentient life mattered.